Thank you so much for inviting us today. Absolutely thrilled to be here. Jacqui and I will do this as a double act because that is how we work in everything that we do. And yes, we'll share the slides between us as we go through. But yeah, absolutely delighted. And as you're saying, it is a collaboration across the School of Education and Chemistry, but actually across a whole host of what we do within the university strategically as well. I should say at the outset, though, I'm actually a physicist by my background. That is what my PhD is in. I'm not a chemist. So I freely admit that. However, I am really passionate about skills development in practical work and science in general. So that is why we've had such a long, fruitful collaboration together. But Jacqui, I think I'm handing across to you for the first set of slides. Is that correct?
Yep, can do.
Yep.
Next slide, please. It's going to be one of
Yes.
those. So there's, as I said, there's our introductions. And as Helen said, she is a physicist and by training, but also is head of our research and development team in our Centre for Academic Development as well. So we've got lots of tendrils out across the whole institution. And I will say, I can see some people in the audience. This talk has been amended slightly from one that we presented at the Chemical Education Network as well. So it's great to be in the room with physicists and chemists and lots of other people. We do collaborate, and this is a piece of work that we've collaborated on with more than just chemists and or physicists. Next slide, please. So what we're going to do, firstly, my bit is just to give you a quick summary of the project that we did, so just sort of what we found and so on. And then I'll hand back to Helen, who's the real expert in the actual the pedagogical evaluative techniques, the research techniques that we used. The reason we were asked initially to pull this talk together was because it hadn't really struck us at the time that this was quite an unusual way to go about doing research. But actually, when we looked at it, certainly most of the work that I've been doing with my fourth year research students and the work I've been doing with Helen previously had a questionnaire where we did some stuff and then we had follow-up focus groups. This one was deliberately designed to be the other way, and I'll leave all of that design to an explanation to Helen, but I'll go through in part one just a quick summary of the project, what it was, so you know what kind of the context in which we were working. Helen's then going to go through the techie stuff, I guess, the research bits of why we did it the way we did it and how we did it. And then I've just got a thought exercise for you. I'm a former secondary school teacher, so there's always a bit of work to do at the end, where hopefully you'll be able to think about potentially putting this in your own context and what the relevance is for your own work. And then we'll hand back to Helen to promote one of our networks as well. Next slide, please. So our paper that came out of this piece of research, if you'd like to have a look at it, there's a QR code on the screen now. The paper that came out of the research was this one. And as you can see from the title, it was about post-16 students' experience of practical science during COVID-19, during the pandemic, when, of course, practical science was somewhat tricky, shall we say, and the impact of that experience on students' self-efficacy in practical work, particularly in the higher education lab. So we're really looking at the transition space from what did they experience at A-level, which was right in the middle of the pandemic, and what did they bring with them? How did that affect them compared to work we'd sort of done previously? Next slide, please. So this wasn't just Helen and I, as Neil talked about, we're big fans of huge collaboration. We collaborate as much as we can. So here's a list of all our collaborators. There are people on that list who you may recognise. There's physicists, there's chemists, there's biologists, there's some educational researchers on there, and there's also at least one student. Yes, two students, there we go. There's two of our research students who helped us with this work. So in fact, three, because Lauren has gone on to be an academic, but is still one of our students when she was doing this work. And then not. So huge range of collaborators. The work actually started in collaboration with one of the A-level awarding bodies, AQA. And Helen and I, obviously from Durham, a huge set of colleagues from Durham as well, but also in collaboration with colleagues at Liverpool University. So we had two cohorts of students at different institutions that we were looking at. Next slide, please. So our research questions were in three parts. So it was particularly for students starting undergraduate degrees in science, and specifically that was in physics, chemistry, and biosciences or biology. We wanted to investigate what were the students' experiences of practical work in their post-16 studies. So in all cases here, their A-levels, and obviously we were in partnership with AQA, who are an A-level awarding body. What were their experiences of practical work during COVID-19? What were they actually able to do in school? We've had lots of thoughts of what they might be able to do, what would be shut down, what would still be possible, but we wanted to really dig into that. We wanted to know about how confident students felt in relation to their science practical skills at the start of their degree. We quite often do those kind of audits. Those of us working in HE labs in science departments will often, talk to students about that, but we wanted to really try and tie those things together and think about how prepared the students felt in relation to the different practical skills at the start of their degree. Next slide, please. Thank you. So Helen will dig into this in a lot more detail, but these were the designs and methods that we used. So Helen will talk about all of those in more detail. But as you can see, phase one, quite uniquely for us at this stage, was to use focus groups at the beginning. They were set up by AQA, actually working with A-level students in schools, asking them about their experiences of practical science during COVID-19 to inform the development of the survey questions following the thematic analysis of that data. So there were 18 existing A-level students across AQA's provider schools and so schools who AQA provided A-levels for, and they were A-level students in chemistry, physics and biosciences or biology. And that was done in July 21, so after they'd finished their A-level studies. Phase two was the survey that we pulled together following the focus group, where we wanted to look at students' experiences of practical science during A-level and the impact on how that made them feel about, in terms of preparedness and confidence for study in HE. And that was very much around a skills audit, looking at the specific practical skills that we felt they needed. And that was across Durham and Liverpool universities. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our findings, in summary, we found that students' experience of practical work was probably expectedly really varied. Some students thought everyone had been in the same boat, either everybody had done very little or none at all, but actually our findings show this wasn't the case. There was actually a lot more variety than probably I'd expected as a former A-level teacher. I think we expected some, but not as much as we found. School closures, ongoing social distancing requirements and changes in assessment criteria resulting from the pandemic, we found may have had the potential to negatively influence students' development of self-efficacy, so that belief in yourself to be able to perform tasks in relation to practical work. I guess not surprising, but it gave us some data that we could use to evidence that. And students considered that the situation during COVID actually helped them prepare for independent working. So yay to silver linings. However, they didn't consider it helped them to prepare for working independently in the lab. They were very concerned about the tradition to lab work. Now, those of us that have been working lab work for a while in teaching lab, students are usually very concerned about that particular aspect of their course. But interesting that the independent working aspect was sort of more outside of the lab than inside the lab. Thanks, Helen. We came up with some recommendations. The recommendations that we came up with to think about how we track these students who've missed out on that practical experience during COVID. We thought about, we need to consider carefully how we support those students' self-efficacy, build up their own confidence in their own abilities through appropriately scaffolded learning opportunities within practical work. Certainly, we implemented some of that in our teaching labs here at Durham and made sure that we had really pulled everything back to base principles of actually doing the techniques. In that context, the skills survey that we developed for the questionnaire can be used and has been used as a comprehensive skills audit for STEM subjects at the start of undergraduate year one. So you can actually use that to check out how your students are feeling about the specific manipulative and other skills in the first year lab. And we also highlighted that the students have really varied experience, and we need to realise that it wasn't the case that everybody was doing nothing or everybody was doing it. It was very, very varied and more than usual. I think we all know that it's quite varied experience that they bring in anyway from school, but particularly during the pandemic. But the opportunity presented with that varied experience would allow peer interactions and collaborative learning, and that was something that we recommended as a way to really help build up that self-efficacy as well. Thank you. If anybody does have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or shout up now. I shall close my mouth for 10 seconds and wait for anyone to scrabble for a hands up if they would like it. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, well, we're happy to answer questions at the end, so I shall move on and hand over to Helen to unpick the pedagogical... Oh, sorry, Neil's got a question. Hello, Neil. It always takes a while for people to scrabble for the hands up, doesn't it?
Yes, I had to scrabble for where the hand up button was on Zoom rather than Teams. What was it? It was actually about your method of actually having the focus group first and then the questionnaire. Because actually I was doing a piece of work a while back, and that's exactly what I wanted to do, because I wanted to have a focus group of students to think about what questions I was then going to ask in the questionnaire. But at Kingston, in terms of our ethical approval, you put it as a project. and they want the survey, all the questions of the survey as part of the ethical approval. So I just wondered how you tackled that. I mean, did you have separate ethical submissions, or was it slightly different?
Helen,
I'm
I'll
happy.
let you have field that one.
Yep, no problem. Yes, you're absolutely right. So we do addendums to the ethics application. So
Right.
um, often many of the projects I'm working on are multi-year projects. We won't know what we're going to be submitting for year 3 at the beginning. So we have within the system, and I suspect most of the online systems can handle it. There's an option you go for update ethics approval, and then you submit the next stage
Right.
of the data. So yes, the ethics team are absolutely fed up of me because they're constantly getting updates because I've got that many projects that I'm working on. But yes, it was a case of we did the focus group, and then once we knew that, we then put
Right.
in the next set of data collection tools so that we could
Okay.
yes, submit it at that point.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Thanks.
excellent, super. Right. Well, I'll talk you through our thought process and why we made the decisions that we made then for the design that we took. And really, it's sort of without going into detail, because the other thing I'm going to point out here is although I work in the School of Education, I come from a physics background. Everything I have learned from my education research side of things has been on the job or bits of training as I've gone along. And also, I really struggle with big words, genuinely. So all of these words like paradigms, epistemologies, ontologies, they are words that the meaning of them, that what's behind them is the thing that is important, not necessarily the actual word itself. So the key thing as we're designing our projects and we're thinking about what we want to do, we're thinking about, well, actually, what's the research question? What are we aiming to do? And always bringing it back to the research question, but then reflecting on that as to how we can choose methods that will best support us to be able to collect information to answer the question. Those could be qualitative methods, they could be quantitative methods, or for almost everything I do, it's mixed methods, bringing the two together. Thinking about the approaches that we're taking to do that. So, is it an experimental approach? I do lots of randomized control trials, usually in school level systems, because doing those in HE is quite tricky. We're about to try. But is it a case study, really digging into depth and examples, looking at the area in a lot of detail? Ethnography, being on the ground, really understanding what's going on around us. So we're thinking about what's most appropriate for the thing that we want to do to answer our research questions. And then also, really importantly, thinking about our own worldview that we bring to the project. And I'm very much come from the constructivist sort of side of things, but I will adapt that depending on how I am working with the project. And I'll admit every single time that I need to do it, I need to go and Google which one it is that I am looking at. But I have a belief that usually I'm coming from people can develop, people can grow, and that I want to be doing most of that within a positive environment that supports them to do that. Well, that is a worldview that I need to be really conscious of as I'm designing my projects, because actually that will impact, especially qualitative data as I'm analysing it. I'm coming at it with a particular mindset as I look at that data, and it's just acknowledging that and recognising it. The taking another project as an example, not the one that we've just talked about here, but I did a big one that was looking at creativity collaboratives all over the country. And with those, as we were talking about things, looking at the data, I realized I very, very strongly believe in the importance of creativity, especially in science. And so I realized that as I'm looking at the data, I am coming with a very optimistic worldview as I'm looking at it. I'm looking for how it is working as an evaluator, usually within it. Now, that could be a very different worldview to somebody else that is coming thinking, well, actually, I want to be seeing, sort of if this is coming from it, maybe how this isn't working and things. So what we need to do is just look at what we bring to our projects as we're doing it, especially if we're looking at qualitative data. Being reflective is what it is. You're just recognizing what you're bringing, but picking the methods that work to answer your questions, picking the way of being with your participants and how you're going to set it up so that you're looking at it and recognizing what you are bringing yourself to the project. So with all of that comes together and impacts on the research design that you choose. What I will say, just to you can see at the bottom, there's the reference and there's the slides at the end, but I particularly enjoy Creswell as a good reference for these kinds of things because it includes diagrams and I like a good diagram. But if we're thinking about designs, and I'm going to focus on mixed methods for the purpose of what we're doing here, we can think about, well, what is it we want to know? Is this something that we actually already recognize? There is some that we can see what's going on and we want to explain it. Or is this something where we don't actually know what's going on? We need to explore it. And that's the main difference between what we've got here on this diagrams and between, as Jacqui was saying, this, do we take focus groups first or do we do the focus groups afterwards? With an explanatory design, it's usually that you're feeling pretty confident that, for example, you could design a survey and you know what you need to ask. So it's fairly obvious what the questions need to be. You know about what you're doing. So you can design your questionnaire and then maybe you want to go into more depth after you've done the questionnaire to dig into another area and look in more detail within it. So that would be sequential because they're happening one after another, explanatory design because you're explaining what is going on. Now, with the case of the COVID project that we did, that one, we had no idea what was going on. This was brand new. It was in COVID and we did not know what the situation on the ground was. So we decided we needed to take an exploratory approach. We needed to find out what was going on because otherwise there's the potential we were just going to ask several hundred students the wrong questions. So what we did was we worked with AQA who could get to the students before they'd even got to the transition to university to find out what their experiences had been like on the ground during their A-levels. Because they're AQA, they had a huge number of schools they could get to. So this meant that they could get students from a range of different schools into one online room to ask them the questions. So we did the qualitative data collection using the focus group, got a whole range of thoughts, opinions, could advance your focus group. They could share where things were the same, where things were different. And then using that, we designed our questionnaire so that we could then look broad. So we started narrow and then went broad, whereas often with the explanatory approach, you might start broad and then go narrow to dig into a particular area. And as I say, so the sequential because it's one happening after another. So there is also another option, which is another one that I use often for many of my projects, which is concurrent triangulation. They're all just technical names for, as you can see, flows of how you're working within your design. In this case, it just means you're doing your quantitative and your qualitative at the same time, and then you bring them together when you're doing your analysis. So it's nothing particularly complicated. It's just might have focus groups going alongside at the same time your survey data collection. In this case, you'll have developed your tools, your data collection tools at the same time at the beginning. So you'll have done both at the same time. You're not waiting for one to design the next one. Both at the same time, collect the data, look at it all together. You can then do, imagine these are just flow diagrams. So you can actually piece these together, use them in different ways, put them into different stages. The big 3-year project that I've just finished, which was working with hundreds of schools across the country, what we did was we had 3 phases to that project, and each phase did a different type of data collection within it. We collected all the data, analysed it at the end of phase 1, decided what to do for phase 2. So you can do lots of different things in all the different ways. They're just posh names that when you write them on the paper, they sound like you're doing something way, way fancier than you're actually doing, because all it is thinking about the order you need to collect the data to be able to understand and answer your research question. So I'm going to pause there because actually that is the crux of sort of thinking through our design. Yes, we've got questions coming in, so very happy to now take questions. Do you
want me to read Alice's out? So Alice has posted in the chat, with the exploratory approach, is it difficult to get ethical approval for a project because you don't have the survey questions at the start? So I think that's related to the issue that Neil raised with, what's ethics would you be expecting?
No, because all we do is we put in an ethics addendum. So certainly all the ethics approaches at Durham, there's no requirement for you to put in everything at the very beginning. You can put it in and you say on the ethics form, it's coming later. So we will, and you cannot do your data collection for that later stage until you've got the next ethical approval. But you just say, we're doing this first bit, putting this in now, and then we expect that in, sort of 3 months time, give them the date, we'll be coming back with the next data collection tool. We will not do any data collection until that point, but they then know that that's part of it. In many ways, it would, sort of, you can, if there's any comeback on that, you say, well, actually, it is unethical to be submitting questions that you're just randomly smattering questions because you're having to guess if you don't do it. This is using a research-informed approach. You've got the technical terms for them to be able to collect that data. It does mean that the ethics committee look at it twice. Usually, though, it's a very quick turnaround on that second look because all you're doing is submitting the data collection tool and explaining why you're doing that. So my experience is usually that comes back fairly quickly in that second phase.
And just to add as well, that when you put the first ethics bid in for phase 1, you're putting in the research that you're doing is focus group based, and so you can put in the loose focus group questions that you're potentially thinking of using. And we've not, I don't think we've really had a problem with that, have we? No one actually.
No, never had a problem with that. They're usually very, very happy with the idea that that's just. As Jacqui says, it's very unusual maybe for some of the research that we've done, or that in some of the STEM departments, that it's seen as being unusual because it's not our usual way. This is completely normal as an education research approach. We'd be using these kinds of things. So should there be any pushback, you've got the references on the slides for the approaches. This is just really good practice for this kind of thing. So I hope that answers the question.
Because of the nature of the work that Helen and I do and the areas we work in, we've put things through ethics both in a chemistry department for educational research. We've put things through ethics through our Centre for Academic Development. They've got their own ethics committee, and we've also put it through the education department because we can kind of pick and choose given the nature of where we work. So there's always the option for a second opinion if you have some particular issues in a particular department's ethics committee. When I first started out doing this kind of research, it had never been done in our chemistry department before. So it was a bit of an odd situation where the ethics committee was sort of coming back with lots of questions about, but what is this? So I think we've moved well beyond that now, but at least, at that point, it's helpful to be able to point to a different department if they want some sort of
because actually it's interesting how you talked about how you gain your ethical approval and why you feel, because we've had some previous seminar about gaining ethical approval, and it does vary across universities. So for example, at Kingston, if I was doing any sort of education, it goes to a university, so it's not in faculty, it goes to university. So there's then sometimes a bit of an issue because then it's been then reviewed by a psychologist, who come from a very different, and they often asking things, well, that's not appropriate for this small bit of project and all that sort of thing. So I think why I was saying that, because I think that leads people like me to most minimize our applications to the ethics committee. So it's a nice idea to have it all done in one go. But I think, as you see, in this case, hopefully that second one would be a small piece of work because you've already put your literature background, your research questions, all that. All you're now doing is, and our process does have that. It says if you want to change anything, you have to, resubmit or whatever. But in this case, it would just be resubmitting not resubmitting, but submitting basically the questionnaire and saying, these questions are appropriate, sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's about including that on your first submission to say, look, here's the diagram adapted from Cresswell, stolen from Helen's slides with crediting. That we're using as our theoretical framework for our research design. This is phase 1. These are the focus groups. Here's all the ethics stuff associated with the focus groups. Here's the potential questions. There will then be a questionnaire developed. That will come back. Here's when we think it's coming back. That will be added to this ethics thing. We can't write the questions now because we don't know what they're going to be yet. And I don't think anybody could seriously push back.
No, I don't think that would be a problem. I think it's just our own probably reluctance of keep going back to educate, the ethics committee. But I think that's it.
Okay.
So I was just going to say as well, one of the things I often end up doing is advising some of our other ethics committees across the university. So if a question comes back, is this something that is normal? Sort of you're able to do it. So it might be useful if you've got some critical friends that are able, you can draw on to just sort of say, actually, this has been absolutely fine. Or even signpost to papers that are published where you say, this is the method that is done in this paper, as we would do, sort of if writing up, we're just citing the method and where it's been used before. So yes.
Has anybody else got any questions about either the paper itself or the research design information that Helen's just shared?
So that's it. Another question, people have been like, because one of the one of the, not challenges, but also one thing we want to move for, because as STEM researchers, often I think we do feel far more comfortable with questionnaires and that quantity than actually focus groups or semi-structured interviews. So there's one thing that encourages that, but then there's the other aspect of actually getting students involved in those focus groups. I mean, did you have any challenges in that area? And why I say that is, Kingston, we've had, goes up and down about whether you offer them something in terms of an inducement, whether a voucher or that. And of course, some ethical reviewers think that compromises it, and others are happy with that. So I just wondered if you'd had any experience in that area.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
I mean, certainly when Helen and I first started working together, it was incredibly helpful that I was the module leader for all of the first year laboratory course in chemistry. And Helen was obviously the expert who had all of the skills to do all of that sort of pedagogical intervention, but didn't have access to the students at that level. So that was really helpful. And in terms of getting them to fill in questionnaires and so on, we do a lot of our research via fourth year undergraduate MChem pedagogical project students, and actually they're really good at getting first years involved, because they sort of go into, it's usually into the lab if you've got a captive audience, to say, hey everyone, I just wanted to talk to you about my fourth year research project, and they seem more keen to help each other than they do necessarily for us. But also as the lab leader, it just gives you that it gives you that mailing list where you can say, look, this is some of the research that goes on in the department. This is,
So it was more the tricky in getting them to volunteer for the focus groups rather than you're absolutely right. Your student partnerships are great for getting the students to. I mean, I had one this year, and she did a fantastic job. Relentless in trying to get students to do the questionnaire, which is far more successful than I would have been. But actually getting students to volunteer an hour or time of their time, or whatever, that's about.
So we do use inducements for focus groups, yes. So inducement rewards, bursary policies, vouchers.
Thank yous. So we usually phrase it as a thank you these days.
Thank you.
As what we've got. It's a range as to what we do. So I did a project with engineering, during the last year. And we only got 2 students. And that was we had interns that were supporting. So that was frustrating that there were only 2 sort of took part in it. We had tried different ways. We always have to plan for the potential. We over recruit to the focus groups usually so that we can try and do it. Timing it, thinking really carefully. Could we put it after a room that's going to be really close, but after a time that we know they'll have been in the department, if it's going to be an in-person one. We offer cake usually, so there's some form of cake or chocolate or something, that obviously planning for dietary requirements. So trying to do that, but the key thing is trying to get them bought in, as you say, sort of trying to do that, but just acknowledging it is the harder part. And actually we're even seeing a drop off on getting them to fill in the surveys as well at the moment. So sort of, I guess everybody is asking for more evidence around everything, and there's definitely fatigue around it. So I guess prioritizing whether the data collection for this is the most important thing, with everything that's going on around it. And if it is, then really supporting selling it in a way that appeals to them as well. So why is this important to them? And again, for ethics, I would be citing the evidence that says why it's okay to be using incentives that it can't be something that would be more than just reasonable recompense for their time. So we might be offering for an hour-long focus group a £10 Amazon voucher, something like that, or as I say, cake that we've got within there. And think one of my students in the School of Education last year was working with other Chinese students across the university and wanted to collect data. So they were offering a particular type of tea that they knew that students found hard to get, and also some biscuits from home sort of thing as an incentive. So tailoring it to what but it can't be bribery, and it can't be overly incentivized. So. And genuinely, for working with disadvantaged communities, when we're doing work outside of the university community, we need to really carefully think about actually what would be an incentive. In some cases, we're offering vouchers to families, and actually, sort of almost what level at that point are we incentivizing too far? So, your students, the university community. It's getting that balance between it's a thank you for their time, but actually you don't want it to be an insulting thank you, but you don't want it to go too far the other way and be something that actually is coercion to turn up, because actually if they didn't turn up, they're missing out on something. So you don't want to go that way the other. Lots of evidence out there on different things. For your ethics committee, citing that evidence again. So just being rigorous, I think that's the main thing. And you can really, if once you get a bank of the types of things that you can put in, you can just reuse your references each time for we're using this approach because, so, and
Yeah,
then
no, that's
pop it
useful
in.
because I think my experience in the past is, it can vary from the ethical approver, the ethical reviewer. Some don't have an issue with it, but
Yeah,
some, yeah, and they don't categorize. So advise against this, or I'm not quite sure. It's sort of, discouraging
yeah,
in that respect. But
yeah. No, we
We,
had
we
one that.
also,
Oh,
sorry,
sorry.
I was just going to say, Helen, when we're using an explanatory approach, so we do the survey first, followed by the focus groups, we do have a standard approach of putting a question at the end
yeah,
saying, would you be interested in doing a focus group? And that gives us at least a pool that we can then
yeah,
go
Yeah,
to with a potential
yeah,
yeah.
cake offer or something.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. I was just going to say, if you're doing any sorts of public engagement type research, working with school students and age groups, thinking about how you get buy-in from them. So that was something that's just come back from one of our biosciences ethics panels. They wanted more information about how consent from the students was going to be got, because actually they were getting it from the parents, but they wanted to make sure the students had definitely opted in. So you might get questions around that as to how you're getting your participants opted in, and just making sure that it's very, very clear. And I see ethics as, I'm going to admit, a frustrating conversation to make sure that we're doing it well. And Jacqui and I have always described that ethics process as essentially being the design process
yeah.
for our project. So by going through that form and putting in there, we see it as our design. So yeah. And so I'm going to move on to the next slide, but please do keep asking questions, because I'm going to hand back to Jacqui now. This is for consideration in your own context.
Yeah, so Helen's shown those. I didn't know, we thought this might be quite helpful because I found it very helpful when I first saw those diagrams. So we've seen those three diagrams for the three different approaches. For this particular research paper that we've presented briefly today, we use that exploratory approach of having a focus group first, followed by survey questions, and Helen showed that sort of flow chart across. There's the other one, which is the explanatory, which is the questionnaire, followed by the focus groups that evolve from that, where you want to unpick further something that you've got in the survey. And then there's I can't remember what we called it.
Concurrent.
Yeah, concurrent, the triangulation one, where you do focus groups over here, questionnaires as well, and then you think about how you bring that together so they're happening at the same time. So I think for me, actually, I had a penny drop moment when I started to see those as sort of research designs that I could just go back to the framework for each time. And as Helen said, we rely heavily on that Cresswell reference, which really makes it nice and easy and visual. So in terms of the exploratory design that we've talked about, I thought it might be helpful to have a think about where that might help you. Because I know when we work with, particularly when we work with students, there's a thing, and I don't know whether it's a universal thing or whether it's just an our student thing. They all think they're brilliant at writing questionnaires because they've done lots of them, and then they try and write the questions, and then you realise that it's actually quite tricky. And in many cases, if we had time, it would probably be helpful for them to actually ask focus group questions first and build from it. So I did wonder whether it would be helpful just to give you some quiet thinking time or note writing time to think about a project you're working on at the moment, or any idea for a project which might lend itself to that exploratory design, where the focus group is designed to pull out things that you need to know so that you can write the actual questionnaire, which I think we can probably safely say questionnaire first is kind of a default setting, I think, for a lot of these projects. So maybe try and flip it on its head. Maybe think about something you've got going already, maybe one you've done already where you think, actually, I found when I was analysing the questionnaire data that I hadn't asked quite the right questions. What could you have done? How could you have done the focus group? So we've got a few bullet points, and I will be quiet. I'm going to do silent tumbleweed time for everybody to have some quiet thinking time in a minute. If you grab some notes or just get your thinking caps on, how might this idea be useful in your own context? Past projects, future projects, or something you've just thought up? What opportunities do you think there might be? What advantages would there be? We've thought about some of the challenges already, but what challenges might you encounter? I'm going to shut up, give you about 3 minutes of quiet thinking time, and then I'd be really interested to just hear about your own context and your own experiences. So I give you 3 minutes. Okay, so for those of you that know me well, you know how painful it is for me to stay quiet for 3 minutes. So hopefully that just gives you some quiet thinking time to just think about your own context. And I think going back to what Neil said at the introduction to today, that spirit of collaboration, these kind of discussions really have led to some really fruitful collaborations. The first discussions that we had with AQA meant they went off and did those. They ran those focus groups for us, and then we don't know whether any of those students actually came to either Liverpool or Durham, but that we were able to all work together, and it just gave us a bit more reach. So I'd be really interested if anybody's keen to share their thoughts here, things they might be thinking about. Hopefully that might trigger some opportunities as well for people to go, oh, I'm interested in that as well. Shall we do it together? But Neil's already put something in the chat, so I'll let you see.
Perhaps I just briefly talk about, I don't want to hog the conversation, but I mean, I mentioned about something where I wanted initially to perhaps have a focus group, and I might be in a different position. I'm interested about how students use generative AI, and I think how that's changed over a number, even a short period of time. And I didn't really have confidence of, that area. So that's why I, was interested. I think a focus group and, 5 or 6 students and actually, getting that would have then refine the sort of questions I would send it then and improve the quality of the questionnaire. As I said, in that particular case, I was put off by and actually because it was a student staff research partnership, I did draw on just the 2 student partners and help that, got them to say it. But I think it would have been richer if we had a broader spectrum of students from different subject areas and things like that. So I think in that case that, should we say the way you've done it or spin it around would have been helpful because an area where I perhaps didn't have much knowledge or confidence about. In another area where I've been researching, career ambitions and what sort of roles students are interested in, I think I had a lot more confidence in, that sort of area. And I was quite happy in designing a questionnaire because, in a way that hasn't changed as much over the last 5, 10, 15 years as something like generative AI.
Absolutely. And I think Helen and I, when one of the first questionnaires we put together, I think was about practical skills in the teaching lab. And given the sort of experience and background of the people, we kind of knew what we were doing already. But the Gen AI one is really interesting. And I think the other really interesting thing of doing this thought exercise is where you realize that the focus group itself and of itself is really helpful. And it's perfectly valid to do a research project, which is just to use the focus groups. Yeah. We're so sciencey in our approach to this, the educational research, I think, is a common theme that I hear all the time. And I'm just as guilty of it as anybody. I like to see numbers. I like to see a bar chart of who picked what. And we really, really count on the questionnaire, the survey is really default setting front and center as important. Yeah. But actually for something like the AI conversation, I totally agree with you, Neil. We're really exploring what's going on. We don't know. We're not really at the point of being able to pull it together. Certainly not for my students. I hear something new every day about how they're using it or how they're scared to use it. And unpicking that is a lot easier and richer if you actually just get their words and thematically analyze it. Then I think anything that useful that would come out of a survey at this stage, I think that would go further. So I think describing that approach as exploratory was really helpful for my little brain in thinking, I don't know anything about this. I want to know stuff. It could be that you get enough out of the focus group to actually have something really valuable that allows you to I mean, most of us are in this kind of area of research to make impact in a classroom, right? So I think for me, that would be really helpful. Helen, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just the other thing that's interesting is that these days so I've gravitated to qualitative as being the most interesting part of it for me. So I'd always have some quantitative around it as well, usually. But it's the qualitative that I find the most interesting. So I always gravitate to the qualitative responses. What I will say is that this year we did again with engineering, but a different project. We asked a very, very short, it's the shortest survey I've ever done, 5-minute survey. And then we did follow-up focus groups afterwards. And what was really interesting was that that the focus groups have raised more questions. So they've almost ended up now just being the start of what I want to be the next project because it naturally fed through. The findings were completely unexpected. So it doesn't have to stop after one, sort of going through that. But yes, the unexpectedness and really trying to unpick and understand what's going on. It's all about hearing the voice of the student. Yeah. And I think for me, we don't get the voice of the students often enough because it takes time, obviously, and their time and ours is precious. So yeah, but when we can get it, boy, do we tend to learn so much more than we do by just the survey, and especially just a survey with quantitative. The value of qualitative, so valuable.
So I was
just going to say, I was very much that human that shied away from qualitative because it just didn't feel like data to me. But now I'm with Helen. That's the survey, quantitative stuff, I'm like, yeah, whatever, it's a like at scale. I'm not sure it's valid. It gives us something. Oh, look at what they've said about this.
Yeah.
And I found myself really gravitating the other way, which is quite impressive for a physicist and a chemist who has a physical chemistry PhD.
Yeah, so but that leads on to why a lot of some people shy of that is actually, how do they go about analyzing, the thematic analysis or the approaches, and they probably read a few papers and all the complicated things that some people do in Vino and all. I just wondered how you went about analyzing your focus groups. What sort of methods?
We get students to do it.
No, we don't. Actually,
Sorry,
well,
I
we
get
do.
students to do it.
Yeah, we do get them. But actually, I love being able to finally find a day to be able to analyze qualitative data. It genuinely takes me to a happy place. What I would say, I feel incredibly strongly, don't use NVivo. Just leave it. It causes way more complications than it needs to. I use either Word or Excel, depending on what we're doing. I use automatic functioning for headings, and I use that to create my themes, and then I can jump around my document dead easy. You can reorder them, restructure them. So I find that NVivo, I have tried to use it on multiple occasions for projects. It led to way more complications. I analysed a huge, the box of qualitative data is this big, 3-year project, and I did it using Word and Excel to manage what I was doing, and for the analysis, I just gave in with NVivo because it was clunky. Also for collaborating with colleagues, sharing NVivo is an absolute faff. So yeah, my recommendation would be it's the thought process that's more important. Don't use the software because it just causes issues.
That's really encouraging, because I started using the Excel and using a method that somebody else has sort of talked about, and that that's it's a bit more quite manual in a way, but just building up those things within Excel and all that. So that's
I was going to say sorry, no, you talk. I'm going to get the reference. I'm going to recommend.
It's got to be in my personal opinion, it's got to be manual, because the point about analysing qualitative research, yes, indeed. The point about analysing qualitative research is that you are in and of it as a person, as a human. So and it's everybody gets a bit of a buzz from reading through quotes and going, oh, they thought that's unusual. And I think we as scientists, I love the fact that all of us as scientists default to using Excel or Word, because it's like, it kind of feels technical, but actually when I'm training students to do this, I get them to read the books like Helen's shown. We've got other things that they read. They get terribly bogged down in the fact that thematic analysis sounds like a really important thing. I'm like, it's just reading and telling me what it says. So literally I get them we get the transcription, we get it all down, they have it as a Word document. Quite often they'll start off by printing it out, sorry trees, and sitting there with highlighter pens and highlighting, and saying, right, read the first 2 pages, what's coming through to you? Oh, they're all saying they're a bit frightened about this. Right, now read it with a green highlighter. Every time they say they're frightened about this, highlight it, and there you go, you're thematically analysing. And I think we really do have a bit of a thing with educational research that if you put a posh word on it, somehow it sounds a lot more academic, but it also frightens off people like me who came from a very science background. So
I was just going to say, highly recommend get yourself a copy. It's Broad and Clark Thematic Analysis, absolutely fantastic. It has the list of the stages to go through. So Jacqui's just described that first one. So familiarizing yourself with the data set, blah, blah. It's got its phases to go through. So I always recommend that one as the steps. Again, you're going to want to cite this when you're saying what processes you're using. But there's also some great stuff online. They Braun and Clark blog. And so there was a really interesting one just a few weeks ago about how do you choose what type of thematic analysis to use, because there are sort of bits you can do, inductive, deductive, those kinds of things. So just, again, it's sort of purposefully picking which approach you're going to take. How are you doing it? And then having the reference to obviously be able to do. There's obviously training courses for sort of how to do it. I don't know whether this network's got one, but if you can get yourself a practical hands-on where you get to do some of it as part of it, I think they're always fantastic.
And don't be frightened by the words. Just Google what the words mean, because Helen said inductive and deductive there. About 10 years ago, I'd have been like, "Ooh, that sounds terribly technical." Whereas actually, it's what I just said was sort of vaguely. This is where I get mixed up. Vaguely inductive, because you're looking at the data, reading it, and thinking, "What is this telling me?" me, and that's where you start to find the themes. The other one, what was the other one?
So deductive is you go
Okay,
in there with a
deductive is
list
where
of
you
what you're
say, I
expecting to
want to
find.
know if students are frightened by Gen AI. So you start coding straight away for frightened of Gen AI before anybody said it. So you could get all the way through and none of them have said it. So that's the two. And I mean, in my book, that's just common sense, right? You either go in with questions you want to see if they talk about, or you see what they're talking about and find an area. And I think if you break it down to that level, I think breaking it down for students has really helped me understand what I'm talking about. You
And
don't never know
yeah,
something to teach it.
and I think the main thing then is just to, as I say, the word I use for everything these days is purposeful. So you're purposefully choosing what design you're going to use, purposely choosing the approach that you want. And then you do have to stick to it because you will have told ethics what you're going to do. You'll have chosen an approach. So the key thing is not to be switching them between deductive and inductive.
Yeah.
You're either letting the data tell you what it's telling you, or you're going in there with a list of, I am looking for these things in my data. And you've chosen up front. So it's just then giving yourself the rigor for the approach that you're taking. So yeah,
And then
I think
you put the big words in the ethics form, so then nobody questions what you're doing because you've clearly
yeah,
theoretically framed it.
yeah. And you just then use the big words in the paper if you wanted to write your SOTL paper, your scholarship paper out of it. Again, you're doing it. We learned on the job. We learned with what we were doing, and then we added the words. So yes, I think be purposeful, ask questions, collaborate is the other thing. So Jacqui and I have worked together for many years now, but we've developed as we've learned how we each like to work. We bring in collaborators. But the importance of not trying to do it all yourself, I think, is really important. The other thing I'd say is if you're evaluating your teaching or looking at what's going on, it's better to do that in collaboration if you can, because then you don't have the bias that you're working with somebody else. You've got somebody else can look at your class, you could look at their class. That helps with, well, is that going, for example, if you're going to be marking their assignment, you don't want to be necessarily feeling that, well, the ethics committee should not let you collect data and analyze it before you mark their papers. But also, it's just really hard to fit in doing it for your own stuff when you're trying to deliver at the same time as evaluate. As an evaluator, I can tell you that's really hard to do. So yeah, finding somebody to partner with is fantastic if you can. Be that student or yourself. So, I'm just going to move to our next slide.
I was going to say, we're running out of time, so
Yeah.
we've got to push on.
Yeah. So yes, one of the other, I was saying collaborate and connect. So we realized very early on that there's obviously a lot of similarities between different disciplines across across STEM, and we're all trying to do very similar things, but in our own context. What we realized was that there's only a small number of us trying to do it within our individual disciplines. It is growing, but there's a small number of chemists, there's a small number of physicists, trying to do chemistry education research, physics education research, STEM education research. We don't yet have a critical mass that makes it very, very easy for funders to realise this is a thing in the UK, which means that actually the funding pots for doing this kind of research just aren't available at the moment. What we did was we set up the Research Evaluation and Innovation in STEM Education, so RISA network, and it's a network of networks. So it's bringing together a network such as this one with, so the IOP Higher Education Group, with the Physics Education Research, all the different groups, bringing them together so that we can share what we're each doing and find collaborators across the UK to be able to work with. And so that we can also then lobby and show the scale at which this is going on. So I'd love to encourage you, if you're not already a member, please join the RISA. It's a mailing list, just a GISCMail mailing list. But what it means is when something like this is being put on, or another network is putting on training, you'll be able to see it being advertised across, or when somebody puts a call out for collaborators, so if you might want to come forward or just join various events that are on. But if we can show that we've got people working in this kind of thing across the UK, we'll be able to lobby the funders to be able to do things, and also just get to know each other and find kindred spirits doing the similar things to each other. So yeah, network of networks just trying to join us all up across the UK.
Well, thank you very much, Helen. I think I've just joined, so hopefully I'll get
fantastic.
And,
excellent.
Thanks again, Jacqui, as well, for a very sort of enjoyable and actually, I think, helpful seminar on getting moving towards doing a bit more college research, but also making us think about which way around we do it. And I think that's a different approach and invaluable in some cases.